And really, I think the things that stood out to us they were the scalability of just soda in general, right? You've got coffee shops, you've got tea shops. There's a lot of regionality with drinks and beverages, but there was no one that was really focused on energy type beverages through a drive-through setting. So we bought into them in 2016, and obviously where they're at today is a much different story than where we started.
Austin Smith is a former principal at Savory Fund, the venture capital firm that bought a majority stake in Swig, the viral dirty soda shop making national headlines. He's now moved on to Big Blue Swim School as a franchisee, where he's building 21 locations. In this episode, we talk about his experience as a brick and mortar business investor, as well as what he's seeing now on the operating side as a franchise owner.
Yeah, so we purchased 21 stores, the majority of the Utah market, all in Arizona, Nevada, Colorado Springs, and then Idaho. Pretty big territory, 21 locations. The stores that we built, they're big stores. At the time, 10,000 square feet, multi-million dollar build-outs.
I think the starting point, so for Savory Fund, how did you first get into that whole world of what I'm calling brick and mortar venture capital?
I was the first employee that started with Andrew Smith, the current managing director of Savory Fund. We started back in 2011 when I joined him, and it was just him, myself, and our chief operating officer sitting in his basement trying to figure out how to do food and beverage, right? He was a ex-technology CEO and had started and sold 3 different technology companies, but got really tired of how connected the tech world was to the markets. He had an online marketing technology company, went through the dot-com bubble burst. He had an online technology real estate company, went through the 0708 crash, and was just like, I'm tired of this. I want to do something different. So he was like, what does everyone need, regardless of what the market does? And he was like, food, right? We all have to eat to live.
Yeah.
So we got involved in a concept called Neater's Bakery and Cafe, local bakery chain here in Utah, where I'm based. And at the time, they had 5 locations, and we saw an opportunity to get involved with them and then scale them and help them expand their location presence and their EBITDA bottom line through just efficiency and systems. That's what he felt like he was good at. And at the time, I was super young, inexperienced, 20 years old, and looked up to him a lot growing up. He's actually my uncle, and approached him and was like, hey, I want to come and work for you. I'll do whatever you want. I'll start at the bottom and work myself up. And he's very anti-nepotism. So it took a sales pitch, I think, for me to get in with him and to want to be around him. But ultimately joined him. And yeah, over about 7 years, we grew Neaters from 5 locations to 60 across 12 states. 50 of those 60 we owned and operated as their master franchisee. And it was a great opportunity for us to get involved in food and beverage and really cut our teeth on what it takes to run a successful restaurant.
I think given the timing of the dirty soda craze, I know Savory Funds invest in a lot of great concepts, but I'd love to
Yeah,
focus in on Swig. How did you discover Swig?
it's a crazy concept. I mean, I think all the social media right now with the secret lives of Mormon wives and everything that's going on in that has really put Swig on the map, which is great for them. They've been expanding rapidly, but the whole Savory Fund story, when we got into years 5, 6, 7 with Neater's Bakery, we realized that there was a huge opportunity in the middle market where a lot of food and beverage investors weren't playing. And there's a lot of those bigger buyers out there that Rourke Capital, the Carp Rileys of the world, the El Cattertons. Really, they don't want to look at anything smaller than, call it 10 to 15 million in store level EBITDA. So we saw this opportunity where there was a huge part of the marketplace that has high potential emerging food and beverage concepts that have great food, great cult followings, but lack, either the operational proficiencies or the access to capital, or in most cases both, right? They've never grown a business before, and they're chefs trying to figure out how to take their mom's recipe and build out this business. So we saw this huge opportunity to come in and provide both of those things, the operational prowess and the access to capital through a fund structure. And that's when we decided to bring on the fund structure and form Savory Fund. So one of our first brands that we acquired was Swig, and we made 3 initial investments. It was Swig, Mobetta's Hawaiian style concept, which is a Hawaiian style plate food concept. Really cool concept. It's crushing it right now. And then R&R Barbecue, more of a localized regional type barbecue. that was just doing really well, had 3 locations at the time, and we felt like we could scale it. But Swig, we felt like was a very differentiated approach than kind of our typical fast casual food and beverage play. We saw it as being something that has been around forever. Coke and Pepsi are multi-billion-dollar companies. And it was something that we felt like with our ability to come in and help provide those operational resources and the capital to be able to really level up that concept, improve the systems, improve the processes, scale up the brand. We felt like this was something that we could take to the masses and really scale nationwide. So we bought into them in 2016. And obviously, where they're at today is a much different story than where we started.
You referenced Coke and Pepsi, obviously just multi-billion dollar companies, but is that what gave you guys the confidence that selling pure soda beverages, I know obviously there's flavor syrups and such, but that would work and be a profitable enough business?
Yeah, I mean, the founder story is phenomenal. Nicole Tanner is the founder. She founded Swig in 2009 and loved the idea of being able to go somewhere and get a quick drink that didn't smell like a cheeseburger or a corn dog, right? Like, I think that that's what we all grew up with. Those that, would go through a drive-through and get a soda as a refreshment. You go to Sonic or you go to McDonald's or whatever. And they do a great job, like nothing wrong with them. But you've got to wait behind the family that's getting a Happy Meal or someone that's getting their corn dog through the drive-through. And it just wasn't a great experience. So Nicole's vision for Swig was, I'm a busy mom. I just want to go through and get my Diet Coke and move on with my day. And I want it to be fast and I want my Diet Coke to be great. And she would always do, I can't remember her exact creation, her flavor creation, but she would always add in like a little bit of vanilla and a lime or something. Like that was her special Diet Coke that she'd get from Sonic. So her thought was, if I could do this, like this is what I want. If I could open this shop and essentially provide this service and product offering with people that only want drinks, they want something quick and they just want a quick refreshment, then I think that there's a market for it. And that's really what she built the business around. They opened up their first store in like 400 square feet in this old little shack, just doing drive-through. And that's where it was born. So really, with us evaluating that from a Savory standpoint, I was one of the principals overseeing the investment fund, and Swig was my brand. I was the quarterback on that brand. And really, I think the things that stood out to us was they were the scalability of just soda in general, right? You've got coffee shops, you've got tea shops. There's a lot of regionality with drinks and beverages, but there was no one that was really focused on soda, right? And these energy type beverages through a drive-through setting. We were watching, Red Bull and Rockstar and Monster Energy and all these different groups that were doing, we've got Monster, now we've got Monster, White and Monster Orange and all this flavored energy drinks. And we were like, why hasn't anyone done this with sodas? You've got cherry soda and that's it. Like there's nothing else, right? So our thought was, let's take the exceptional service that Nicole had created with Swig. Let's systematize it. Let's create a better brand, something that people feel passionate about and can really connect with, like Starbucks had done. Obviously our target market with Swig was very different than Starbucks, but that's what we wanted is the young millennials, Gen Zers holding the Swigs, getting involved in the social media scene and creating this brand around this fun beverage concept. So that's what we saw when we bought into Swig. They had 17 locations. We actually closed a couple locations that were underperforming, weren't good locations. That's part of, building a brand is realizing when you need to cut a brand or cut a store loose. And then we spent 2 years really focused on improving the systems, the processes, increasing revenues, dropping more profitability to the bottom line into that EBITDA bucket. And then as soon as we felt like we were really stable, that's when we turned on the afterburners, invested a lot of cash into just scalability of new locations. And then between 2019 and 2023, when we went through our transaction, we built that store up to about 58 locations before selling.
Wow, that's a heck of a run.
It was a lot of fun. So a lot of soda
Yeah.
along the way, imagine.
Yeah, I'm sure. I have two main questions, and the first being on the franchising side, the Swig is largely corporate owned. Was there ever a thought to lean in fully on franchising? And in your mind too, just given that now you're a franchisee, do you have like a framework for when a concept should be franchised versus just go build the majority of the locations yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've got an interesting answer because I think our behavior within Savory and the way that I viewed franchising in general, especially within food and beverage, it's changed over time, right? And part of that was because of this unique opportunity that we had. And that opportunity was Crumbl. Jason McGowan, founder of Crumbl, he came to us when they had like 5 locations. At the time, there were a couple other competitors here locally in Utah. Chip was one of them. They were kind of the first cookie concept, call it, even before Crumbl. They had these massive cookies. They were all the craze. They had like 4 or 5 locations, all corporate owned. And we were talking to them at the same time. But Jason came to us and said, "Hey, I've got this cool idea. I know it's kind of a knockoff of what Chip's doing, but I think I can do it better." He had a technology background. I want to implement this cool technology, support this, and then go and franchise. And what's interesting is back then we were like, that's not going to work. Like chocolate chip cookies, who's going to go do that, right? And then the other thing that we said, he was like, should I grow corporate owned or should I go franchise? And we were like, definitely corporate owned. Do not go and franchise yet. You're not big enough. You're not ready. And ultimately, we passed on that deal. We could have bought Crumbl back when they were 5 locations. And, TSG just bought them for multi-billion-dollar acquisition. So that was a huge miss, right? And that's something that I looked back on and thought that was a big opportunity that we totally missed on. But what lessons can we learn from that, right? And I think one of the things that we saw in Swig after, owning that business and keeping that corporate owned through really the majority of its life cycle within the Savory Fund, we saw that as being something that we could take and really follow in the footsteps of what Crumbl did really, really well, which is taking a brand that's very simple, very basic, putting the spin on it, dressing up the concept, connecting with the end consumer, making it a fun brand that moms and kids can get involved with, and then leveraging that franchise path to really scale nationwide. So in early 2022, when we started to think about taking that brand and, we owned that brand at that point for about 6 years, and we were ready to start to see, it was, first brand that we invested in, Savory Fund. We were ready for our first win for our LPs and providing that first piece of return and really credibility of the fund and what we felt like we could do and accomplish. At that point, we said, do we consider franchising? And when we sat around, within our investment committee, the unanimous decision was yes. And I think Crumbl really paved the way to show what's possible. We felt like we had very similar concept to what they did, but obviously in a more convenient setting through the drive-through and in a little bit of a differentiated function with sodas. So yeah, we ultimately made that decision, but I think it really comes down to a couple things, which is any good franchise concept. Because I think, I saw a post that you put out on LinkedIn earlier this week, which I thought was spot on. But a lot of these concepts, they look at franchising too fast, right? Where they have a great 1 or 2 stores and they're like, I've got it. I've got it figured out. I'm going to go sell 1,000 of these, right? That works with like the 1% of concepts. Crumbl was the 1%, right? Swig, to be honest, I don't know if we could have done the same thing with Swig at the time when we bought in. It wasn't at that stage yet. I think what it takes is you've really got to have a proven model that shows that you can scale and that the brand can travel at least into 2 or 3 distinct geographies. So what I mean by that is, I'm in Utah here. So pretty much the whole Utah market all falls under the Salt Lake DMA, right? Building a couple stores in this market is great. And it shows that that store can travel and do well in a single market. But it's got to have a data point of Phoenix or of Denver or of Vegas, markets that maybe aren't the exact same as Utah from a demographic and a psychographic standpoint. And it's got to demonstrate that it can take and do similar volumes to the tune of 15 to 20% before all of a sudden it says, hey, I'm ready to go and sell 1,000 franchise units. And I can get into Big Blue because I think we've learned this over our experience so far of being involved in this brand. But, what works in one market doesn't necessarily work in another market. And it takes time to figure that out. So having a few of those data points and those proven travel factors really makes a big difference. I think that that's number one. Number two is the relationship of your build out cost to your store level profitability or store level EBITDA, right? You can't go and build out a $2 million building and then only kick off $200,000 in EBITDA and make that your standard, your typical prototype. It just doesn't work, right? So if you can't demonstrate that proven replicability across other markets and create those same types of returns that you're seeing in that initial store from a store level EBITDA standpoint, then you're not ready to scale, right? And sometimes what that means is reducing the box size. Sometimes that means adjusting the operating system, right, to be able to accommodate for additional costs or reduce those costs so that you can drop more profitability to the bottom line. So there's a lot of those levers and factors that you really have to fine tune and tweak. And then the last thing that I always think about is the brand identity Is it something that can scale? When we bought into Swig, the answer was no, right? Like the branding just wasn't in a place to really be something that customers and consumers could identify with. We had to, spend a lot of money on rebranding that brand. And I think the brand where it is today is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Their chief marketing officer, Dylan Roeder, does a fantastic job with their marketing strategy. He's really got an exceptional marketing mind, but that's a big part of the brand. And then lastly, the people behind the brand. I'm asked a lot, like when you look at a brand, what's the most important aspect of the brand? Is it profitability? Is it top line? Is it AUV? What makes that difference? And I think all those things are important, but I think they come after the people and the team that are behind the brand, right? There were a couple cases within Savory Fund that we got involved with several different brands where, the brand was fantastic, the people were not, and it didn't matter how good the brand was, it just didn't work. So I think those factors really are what go into setting up a good franchise concept to be successful, like Crumbl has today and like Swig is doing now.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you said that I agree with. None more so than Crumbl being in the 1%. That's what I try to tell people is, because I'm a big, as you mentioned, proponent of you really got to have proof of concept. And that doesn't mean usually doesn't mean just one location. It means multiple
Yeah.
locations, different markets, show that you can open it up either in one state and then another state, ideally, and the economics work, the ramp up is there. Or it could even be just different towns, just at least multiple locations. And there are brands though, like a Crumbl or an Orange Theory, I believe, only had one location and then they started franchising, and it works. But that, like we said, right, that's the exception, not the norm. The other aspect though of Swig beyond the franchising versus company owned debate is just this drive-through concepts and model in general, right? You're seeing it across Dirty Soda. I know in Utah there's a bunch of other concepts. The guest that we will have on previous to this episode is Chris Hatch, who drive-throughs for a bunch of different concepts. And, we chatted about this in that episode, but what do you think between, again, the Dirty Sodas concepts of the world, the coffee concepts, whether it's Dutch Bros or Seven Brew or a few others? Why does it resonate so much with customers? Because you can just see it in the economics and even the unit growth fueling these concepts, that there's this wave of drive-through businesses. So what do you think it is about it that just works?
Yeah, I think one of the things, we all went through COVID together, right? And that's really where we saw Swig take a big turn from being good to being great through the drive-through, is because all of a sudden you couldn't go into anywhere, right? People were turning to drive-throughs, and those that had drive-throughs within the food and beverage world were able to survive. Those that didn't either created makeshift drive-throughs through their parking lot, or they're not around anymore, right? You just had to iterate and adjust. Within Utah, we really leaned heavily into the drive-through scene in an early stage. We tried the non-drive-through stores as well. One of those locations that I mentioned that we closed was a non-drive-through location in a mall, right? It did fine, not great. There was lots of walk-through traffic, but I think it's that convenience factor. And what we realized was that the brand really is made for that quick snack, treat, refreshment with mom specifically when she's on her way to and from picking up the kids or taking them to an activity or running her errands down to the grocery store. We didn't want to be in the middle of like a major super center where you've got, Target and Costco and all those places. We wanted to be in more of the local center that had the grocery store where mom's going, 2, 3 times a week. And this just becomes part of her normal routine. She goes to the grocery store, it's 11 o'clock, she's going to swing in, she's going to get her Dr. Pepper with, vanilla or cherry or whatever stuff on top. And that's her little treat to say, I'm being a good mom and I feel good about myself today. Right. So I think that drive through component was critical for us. And we decided to lean into that in a very early stage, even before the COVID days. But I think post COVID now, everyone wants a drive through. You go to any city, any concept, and especially all the big restaurants, they all want drive throughs, and it's become very competitive, right? And what's hard, I think, for a concept like Swig or like some of these coffee users is, if they're just negotiating on a multi-tenant building and there's a bigger restaurant concept like a Cafe Rio, for example, that wants to come in and take the drive-through space, as a landlord, you'd always rather lease that space to a Cafe Rio that's going to take 5,000 square feet that you can charge a premium on because of the drive-through versus Swig. We don't want to go bigger than 1,200 square feet, right? So you're giving up, as a landlord, you're giving up your most ideal premium space in your building that you can charge the most rent on to a much smaller user, which isn't ideal. So Swig's had to get really creative, and I think a lot of the other users out there, like Dutch Bros, Seven Brew, like you mentioned, some of those other concepts, they've had to get creative with their drive-through space. And I think a lot of them have turned to, building ground up units because they just can't be competitive from an occupancy standpoint on those end cap drive-throughs where those bigger food and beverage operators want to take the space. And I think that that's one of the biggest things, both from an opportunity standpoint as well as a challenge standpoint, that these, call it specialty users, have to deal with. We tried the shipping container route where we would build out these shipping containers, come in, drop them in these parking lots, in front of these grocery stores, like I mentioned, and try and create something that was different. But even that became too expensive to be able to replicate effectively. So I think that that's something that you've really got to have good economics within the specialty space, especially like these coffee users, like we mentioned, in order to be able to take advantage of that. Because if you don't, trying to go in and compete with Cafe Rio on a drive-through or Raising Cane's or Chick-fil-A or any of these other guys, you're just going to lose every time.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Chipotle and the pizza concepts are doing drive-through models. So it is the most coveted space at the moment. Do you think though there is a correlation to the customer service at these places? Because the Swigs, the Dutch Bros, they do seem to have an above average customer service experience where let's call it legacy, traditional fast food QSR concept. I would say most people would probably agree that you're not writing 5-star reviews about the customer service. You're there for a predictable taste of the food and flavor. But yeah, like the Swigs, the Dutch Bros, there seems to be this like energy from the employees and the social media presence. There's more soul to these brands. And maybe it's just because they're newer and they're on the come up that it feels fresh. But I guess I'm asking for you, seeing it from Swig, do you think that drive through, like something about it enables the ability to provide better customer service that's maybe like advantageous versus it becomes more difficult when you're operating a full service QSR?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Neater's Bakery, I mentioned that was the first concept that we got involved with. We had a drive through there, super tough drive to run. And I think that's just because of the operation, right? Like Neater's Bakery and Cafe was a scratch baked bakery where the bakers would come in at 12 o'clock in the afternoon and work until 1 in the morning baking the bread for the next day. And then at 3 in the morning, the pastry chefs would come in and make all the pastries for the day, for 5, 6 hours. And it was just like that every single day. So everything that you're making is customized and made to order, right? So there's nothing pre-made. And it was tough to run a quick, fast-paced drive-through, right? Like that's just what comes with that territory. They still run their drive-throughs and they do good. And a lot of that comes down to training. But if you get off by a couple minutes, then every person in the drive-through is waiting 10, 15 minutes, right? Which is when you're in the drive-through, that's a long time. It feels like an
Yeah.
eternity, right? Versus I think one of the things that Swig and some of these other concepts do is from a key performance indicator standpoint, we really focused on speed of service through that drive-through, just like, some of the industry leaders like Chick-fil-A do, right? We took the Chick-fil-A playbook and we said, how do we be the Chick-fil-A of drinks, right? Without the my pleasure, right? We want everyone to be happy. We always want to take care of them. We're happy that they're there. You can't say my pleasure. Everyone's like, you're a Chick-fil-A knockoff, right? But
Yeah.
what they do is exceptional, in the way that they train their team is industry leading. But that's what we focused on. We focused on how do we create a good culture within the team. And I think that that starts with branding. And then how do we deliver that speed of service? And I think through those two things alone, that's why as a customer going through the drive-through, you feel like you're getting an above average experience, right? It's not going through the McDonald's drive-through where you're there to get your kids a cheap meal, some French fries because you're tired and you don't want to cook at the end of the day, or you're grabbing some fries as a snack or something. That's just a different experience. And McDonald's isn't trying to replicate what Swig is, right? I think really the differentiation between Swig and everybody else was, how do we provide that speed of service and make sure that we're getting people through where they're never sitting still for more than like 30 to 45 seconds max. Because in the drive-through, as long as you're moving forward, you feel like there's progress.
Yep.
There could be 10 cars in the drive-through, but as soon as you teach the customer that if they pull into that drive-through and there's 10 cars, but I know that it's going to only take me 30 seconds per car to get through, I'm only in this drive-through for 5 or 6 minutes. You build that trust factor with the customer, and then they're going to come back every time. With Neaters, what we ran into is you pull into that drive-through, and if it takes you 30 minutes to get through that drive-through, you're not going back into that drive-through, right? So I really think it's those two things, building the culture within the business, which I think Swig has done a fantastic job of doing. Their social media is just, off the hook. The influencers that they have involved in that brand now and the national exposure that they're getting, I think has really set them apart. And then you couple that with the operational prowess of speed of service. And I think that that's right now one of the reasons why they're winning.
Yeah, it all works together. 'Cause as you said, if it's one bad experience in a drive-through and you just don't trust them, so you don't go back. But then even at the just in the restaurant level, if it is slower, you're probably losing customers because they just see a massive line and they're just going to drive by to the next place. So yeah, it's definitely all interconnected there. Moving from the investor realm to the operating realm, I want to talk a lot about Big Blue and what you're up to there. But before that, I know you become a franchisee of a bit of a unique brand in Payroll Vault. So do you want to talk about how you came across it and why you chose that really in the midst of like very early on into COVID?
Yeah, I'd been, like I said, I joined Savory Fund in 2011. I'd been with Andrew, managing director there for about 10 years. And I love entrepreneurism. I love the idea of starting businesses and seeing businesses succeed, providing jobs, all the benefits that come with, entrepreneurship. But I just had never had the opportunity to do that because I was always focused on the investing side and sitting, on the investor side of the table, talking to the operators about all the incredible things that they were doing. So really what I started looking for was something that I could get involved in that wouldn't take me away from the investing side, that I could do, call it part-time on the side, that my wife could run. At the time, as I was going through my early career, my wife was a private surgical technologist supporting a local orthopedic spinal surgeon here in Utah. And we had a couple kids. She decided to take a step back from that and was getting tired of kind of just being at home, wanted to do something else to keep her busy. So I was like, let's find something that we could run as ours, it could be our business. And we could build, some enterprise value over the next 10 years, build this book of business and grow it from home, right? I stumbled upon Payroll Vault, thought about just all my connections within the food and beverage world. We were looking at 200 to 300 concepts a year when I was at Savory Fund and investing into two or three, right? So I was like,
Yeah.
if we're looking at that many, me buying a payroll brand, reaching out to all my contacts and being like, hey, it's me, let me do your payroll, right? Seemed like an easy sell. And man, that was just like the most naive thought I've ever had in my career. So, we ended up buying into Payroll Vault, the regulations and everything that comes with just payroll in general. It's a lot, right? And me being a finance guy, I was like, I got this. Like, this is not a problem. We can learn this. My wife and I spent months like just learning everything about the tax code and
Oof.
HR and payroll benefits and just all that stuff, right? Just all the stuff that you don't want to do when you're wanting to invest in businesses and grow businesses. It's like, I just don't want to think about that, right? We saw that as being kind of the first play and the first piece to this shared services platform that we wanted to build that then we felt like could support all of our brands within our portfolio over time. We started with them and great concept, great training team. They had a great system as their backbone. The hardest and the most challenging part of that business, honestly, is just sales. It's
Yeah.
getting someone to take the commodity of payroll, take the time and the effort to switch over all their systems to a new payroll provider that is going to save them $100 a month. Like that is the hardest sale on the planet, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And, even with the contacts and the resources and the relationships that we had, it still just ended up being something that we felt like was way too difficult of a sale for the benefit that we were getting. And in order to turn that into a really successful business, which I think you could still do over time, we just felt like it wasn't the right fit for us. That service based transactional type structure that Payroll Vault is, it just wasn't the right thing for us. And we weren't getting the right amount of joy out of that business and building that business. We ended up stumbling upon Big Blue, and once we raised the capital for that, felt like that was a much better play and use of our resources and time. So we decided to divest of that. We sold our book of business to another Payroll Vault franchisee, exited that system, and then doubled down on Big Blue. So it was a
Yep.
really good learning experience for me. Really taught me what I like and what I don't like in business. And I think it's important for people to go through that, right? Like you think, hey, I can do anything, and I can make any business succeed. Personally, me, I couldn't make a super successful payroll business out of Payroll Vault. And that was a great lesson, as I've gone through my career on what I'm good at and what I'm not.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I've done it myself, launched a data software business and we got customers, it was scaling, but I just quickly found out this is not where I want to spend my time. Product meetings in analyzing pixels of what the software design will look like in Figma and these software design products, right? Just quickly learn not the best use of my skill set. I think you got to find problems that because every business is gonna be hard. You got to find the ones that you still can get energized about.
Well, and I think it's the passion too, right? Like the passion that comes with whatever you're doing. I find way more passion in what I'm doing now and some of the side projects and investment opportunities that come to my plate. It was passionless for us. And there's people that love payroll, right? There's people
Yeah,
that love building, technology analytics platforms. But for me and you, those were just not the right fits.
yeah, and I think too, it's a good lesson for people to just kind of really think about what kind of business you're getting into. Where you mentioned for Payroll Vault, it was a sales business. And I think a lot of service businesses, whether it could be gutter cleaning, it could be a B2B service business like Payroll Vault. But a lot of those concepts do come down to if you're going to be the franchisee and the operator, you're going to have to sell to win customers. I think there's a lot of people out there who, when they're buying a franchise, they're not necessarily thinking that. They're just seeing the item 19 and the FTD, or they're just thinking, I want to quit my job and live the American dream, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think that the other aspect of that, just to add on to that, is I think with a lot of these types of businesses, every startup franchise is, hey, we're semi-passive or owner absentee.
yeah.
And that is just the biggest lie. Like I don't know what business you can be involved in that you are not involved in. Like that just doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
With payroll vault, like that took so much time and effort, way more than I expected it. Big Blue, I eat, sleep, and drink swimming lessons right now. When I was at Savory Fund, we're like, food is everything, and you're talking about it and you're dreaming about it. Like you have to be involved in your business. And I can get into my story with Big Blue here in a second, but that was one of the biggest things that I really focused on in the early days of Big Blue was just living it, breathing it, being in the systems, because I learned that you have to be in it if you want to succeed.
Yes, 100%. And I think it is a good time just to kind of transition to Big Blue. So I know you did say it earlier that you came across it while at Savory Fun still, but what exactly was that discovery process like for you?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny discovery process. I started looking into the swim school space back in 2016. Our biggest competitor right now, Goldfish Swim School, great concept, great school. They do a great job. They were the first to market here in Utah, and they opened their first store in 2016. And I remember driving past and being like, "What is this concept?" Like, parking lot was packed. There were kids coming in and out, moms all smiling at each other, and I went in for this tour and was just like, this is such a cool concept. Like swimming lessons, who would have thought, right? Because growing up, like my experience with swimming lessons was 5 days in the summer in a backyard pool from a neighbor down the road. And in Utah, we think about swimming from May to August, and then that's it, right? Because then it's too cold outside and we're all skiing. So this was just like year-round differentiated type concept that I just had never seen, never heard about. I know that there's been swim schools back east for years and years, but we just had never had those in the Intermountain West. So I actually ended up reaching out to the Goldfish director of franchising and was like, super cool concept, would love to get involved. Tell me what's available. And he's like, oh, well, we sold this franchise already here in this market to the existing franchisee, and he's going to scale. So I was like, oh, bummer. Keep my eye on that, and just hadn't really thought about it after that. Every year from that point on, I just kept coming back to these swim schools and was like, it's such a cool concept. There's a huge market. We've got 1 billion kids here in Utah. Like, I got to get involved in this. So I kept reaching out to him every year, 2017, 2018, 2019. And every year he'd tell me the same thing, like, territory's tied up, nothing we can do about it. Check back later, right? Finally, in 2020, I reached out and was like, brother, like, they're not growing. Give me this market. I know how to do this. We're growing concepts all across the country. Like, give me this concept. And his response, actually, which led me to Big Blue, was one of our biggest competitors, Big Blue, is coming to the market. So we're making him starting to grow. And so you'll see new locations. And I was like, Big Blue, I've never heard of them before. Picked up the call, called Big Blue, and here we are now 5 years later. So it was actually one of our competitors that led me to Big Blue,
Yeah.
which is kind of a funny story. But really, what I saw in Big Blue, and it's what I've seen in, I think, swim schools in general, we've got this huge shift within technology of the Amazon effect, online, AI now is a huge component, and a lot of these businesses changing marketing and accounting, payroll, like we talked about, as well as various other businesses. And what I saw about swim schools in general and the swim school market was that, it's something that's more insulated and less tied to the evolution of technology. That doesn't mean that we don't use technology. It's actually a huge backbone of Big Blue. It's our proprietary technology that we've built and that allows us to run and do different things versus an off the shelf technology to run our business. Big Blue has spent millions of dollars building out this proprietary point of sale system, which is exceptional. But the technology component and the disruption within the macro economy is something that I wanted to make sure that I was insulated from within any business that I chose to move forward with. Swimming lessons, you can't teach swimming lessons online. AI can't teach swimming lessons. You can't sell them through Amazon. And, it was an underserved market. I saw a huge amount of white space in Utah. We also here in Utah have the highest per capita number of kids per household in the country. And I think that that's probably a big component of the religious aspect of Utah. But there's kids nonetheless, right? And every
Yeah.
kid needs to learn how to swim. And through this discovery process, the other thing that I really came to learn and really fell in love with the idea of helping position and grow the news and the publicity around was the fact that, drowning is the leading cause of death for kids 0 to 14, the leading cause of accidental death for these kids, right? So above anything else that you can think of outside of birth defects for these young kids, drowning. And you hear about it all the time. Every summer, there's drownings all the time, and it's just the saddest thing on the planet, right? And I thought to myself, like, that's the silliest thing that we're still dealing with here in the 21st century is that kids are drowning. And that's the leading cause of death amongst everything else that these kids have to deal with. And COVID and disease and all this other stuff, it's still drowning. So my thought was it's something that is insulated from technology. It's something that's not going to go away, especially in a market like Utah. We're going to constantly be having more and more kids, and there's going to be more demand for this. And there's the factor that it's an emotional factor for parents. I've got 3 young kids. Scariest thing on the planet is me thinking about one of them having an accident around the water. So what do I want to do as a parent? I want to insulate them from that risk. And if I can do that through swim education, then more power to me, right? The CDC says that 88% of drownings could have been mitigated if parents would have enrolled their kids in proper swim lessons and swim education. That's it, 88%, right? So that's all that it takes. So my thought was if I can build a concept now around this, get involved with Big Blue, own a big chunk of the market, build out this white space, and really focus on this component, which seems to be a big problem if that still remains the leading cause of death for these kids. If we could, save one kid's life through our program, that would make it all the better. And then if we can build a good business model on the back of that as well, and have it be successful for both our investors as well as our employees and the customers, it just seems like a win-win and something that, is going to be around for a long time. So that's really what led me to pull the trigger, raise several $1,000,000, and buy, the second largest region within the Big Blue franchise system here in the Intermountain West.
It is really surprising to hear that that is, like you said, in the 21st century, still the leading cause of death for kids. On the franchise, what was the territory size that you purchased and how many units are open today?
Yeah, so we purchased 21 stores. So we purchased the majority of the Utah market, all of Arizona, Nevada, Colorado Springs, and then Idaho. So pretty big territory, 21 locations. The stores that we build, they're big stores. At
Yeah.
the time, 10,000 square feet, multi-million-dollar build outs, very capitally intensive, beautiful, but just big and expensive, right? So we wanted to really make sure that we had enough space to grow within those markets and not oversaturate them with locations. So we decided to, bite off a big chunk of that and really own this part of the market, the Intermountain West, which we felt like was very underserved and had a lot of white space.
And so, relative to other concepts, you mentioned goldfish, but there is even British swim schools, one of them. There's these
Yep.
concepts, right, where you just rent an existing pool, whether it's at like a local YMCA or, wherever you're renting the pool from. How did you think through going into a concept like Big Blue versus one of those? And I believe there's some structural advantage to what you're doing now, but yeah, I'd be curious to hear what your kind of thesis was there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, that was the thesis right there was the structural advantage. It's, owning the consumer in our proprietary setting. It's not sharing that consumer with LA Fitness or the rec center or anywhere else, right? It's I want the customer to walk through that door and I want them to have an exceptional experience. The moment they walk through that door, from what they see to the way that our customer service is and the experience that they have by being greeted by the staff, through the changing rooms, our blow dry bar, the check-in process at the front, all those little aspects of our business that really separate us from everybody else. It's hard to do that in a British swim school and a YMCA, right? They do a great job and they serve a specific customer. But if you want that exceptional level of customer service and that exceptional experience for both the parent and the kid, you have to go into a setting that's more structured like a Big Blue. And that's ultimately what we've created, right? The moment you walk in that door, it's just a different experience than you've ever experienced for your kids with swimming lessons. And we've tried to make it as enjoyable for both the parents while they're waiting, sitting there, enjoying watching the kids, as it is for the kids in the swimming pool, right? We build these with big, beautiful glass walls where the parents can sit in an air conditioned space. The kids are in the pool room, and the pool room's 90 degrees. It's warm, it's hot, it's comfortable for these little kids that have zero body fat on them. We heat the pool to 90 degrees as well. So it's just a different experience than going to the rec center. The water's cold, the parents are sitting there, it smells like chlorine. Our lobbies are quiet, they've got ambient music. Our staff's coming up and checking in with them, giving them updates on how the kids are progressing. We have a proprietary app where, our managers are on deck watching the kids check off these skills. And in real time, that information is being pushed to the parents' custom app. So they're seeing Annie passed off her back float and she passed off her safety swim and she swam 6 feet today. And here's the feedback. She needs to straighten her legs up because she's bending her knees and that's dropping her waist in the water. So there's a whole science behind it that I just felt like was industry leading at the time. And I still do today. I think we do it better than anybody else, specifically because of that curriculum that's been developed by, our incredible founder, Christy Young. I think it's the structure from the technology standpoint that really differentiates us. And then that endurance-based program that's really teaching the kids from a foundational setting how to swim. We get customers all the time that will come in and be like, my kids aren't using their arms yet, or they're not doing this, or they're not doing that. And I don't think that that's right. We've got a science behind it. It's proven. My kids were in the program for 2 years straight, right? My 4-year-old went from being able to not float on her back to right now, she's in one of our most advanced classes as a 4-year-old. And that's, directly attributed to the curriculum and just staying consistent. And I think that that's one of the things that really differentiates us as well, is that consistency. The fact that, through swimming lessons, just like piano lessons or dance lessons, you have to stay consistent. You have to, continue to learn. It's not just 5 days in the summer. It's 1 day a week, 30 minutes long, the same time with the same kids, with the same teacher. That's really a difference maker that a lot of the competition doesn't focus on.
Yeah, I mean, even just hearing you speak to the minutia of the air temperature in the room at the pool and the pool temperature, I would guess that little kids, if they're even jumping in a cold pool, that could be enough for some kids to kind of complain or push back at mom and dad saying, "Hey, I don't want to go to swim lessons. Like that pool is horrible."
I mean, my wife does the same thing. So, she gets in and it's 85 degrees and she's like, it's freezing. And, I think that's just natural, right? It's got to be a comfortable experience for everyone involved.
Yeah. So diving into your operations, let's go to location number 1. How did you raise the money for it? What was your structure and thought behind that? And then, I mean, we could start there. I'd love to get into the build out and such, but
yeah. So obviously through the private equity, stage of my career, you see all sorts of different structures. Money's raised all sorts of different ways. And that's what I talk to a lot of people about when they reach out asking for advice, like how should I structure this deal or how should I raise capital? Because it's an art. I mean, it takes practice and it takes time and it takes a network. Really what I focused on when I was raising, was putting myself in the shoes of the investor and thinking through, okay, what would I want in this deal? Brand new to market, risky endeavor because there weren't a lot of locations open at the time. Someone that's not a swimmer, I'm a finance guy, right? I'm comfortable being in boardrooms and pitching investors and calling LPs for capital. Like that's where I was in my career. And I was pitching these guys on, hey, let's open this swimming lesson place. Very, very different. So I think part of, what I would say is step 1 is always putting yourself in the shoes of the investor. For this specifically, I wanted to make sure that I was giving them and de-risking their investment as much as possible. On our first deal, we ended up raising some equity to go out and pull together an SBA loan after we raised the initial capital to buy our territory. So that was stage 1, buy the territory. Stage 2, get the SBA loan secured. SBA is tough. I have such a hard time with SBA. I think part of that too is, a lot of the issues with the rates and everything that's going on right now from a macroeconomic standpoint just makes SBA a really difficult pill to swallow. But we ended up doing that for our first store, put down some equity, pulled together the SBA loan, and that's really what helped us build that first location. We structured our capital raise. I always believe in giving investors a one-time preferred return on their money. So always give the investors their money back, especially if you as the operator aren't bringing a lot of capital to the table before you start participating in the return and in the profits, right? I think it's only fair if you're building the model based on sweat equity, you build the operation, they bring the equity, you give them back the equity, which de-risks their investment, and now you guys are at a level basis. So that's what I did. That's what I do in most of my businesses when I raise capital. That aligned really well with the investors, and I think it demonstrates that there's alignment between what you're focused on. It's not, you as the operator coming in and immediately taking every dollar out of the business from a profit standpoint. It's you take care of your investors first, and if you do that, then the business is going to take care of you as well. So that's the way that I raised that capital. I brought in two different investors. They funded the majority of that equity. I took my piece of the cap table as the owner operator, and we opened that first location. And part of what I sold them on was that I was going to step in and be the general manager in that first location. Never been a general manager before for a service-based business, let alone swimming lessons. Again, I was comfortable in the boardroom, and March 2023, I flew out and did a headquarter training with my assistant manager that I'd hired. We were in Chicago for 3 weeks, and for 2 of those weeks, we were in the swimming pool learning how to teach swimming lessons. And I won't lie, there were certain moments of that where I was like, what did I do? Why did I make this decision? I went from this, beautiful ivory tower private equity job to literally being in the pool teaching swimming lessons. And over that first year of us opening that location, I operated as the general manager in that store. And what happens when your employees don't show up? Well, you step in and you take care of the customer, right? So there were many days where I was literally in the pool teaching swimming lessons to the kids, dealing with the customer issues, cleaning the store. But that's one thing that I sold my investors on, was that I was going to be in the thick of it. I was going to know it. I was going to be in the trenches, because as we scaled, I think it's really hard for your team to look at you and respect the decisions that you make if you don't have that empathy and that understanding of what it really takes to run a successful business. I think that that's one of the things that's really set us up for success and has really kept a really strong retention rate with our senior leadership team. We've really not lost any of our senior leadership team between general managers and assistant managers in any of our stores. And I think it's because of that focus on servant leadership, being in the business, demonstrating to not only our employees, but our customers that we understand the business and we can do what we need to take care of them at the end of the day.
Yeah, and as far as the inside the four walls, what does the org chart look like, just as far as general managers, assistant managers, and where are you kind of finding these employees to, we've had fast food operators on the show. We've had a few different categories of owners.
Yeah.
That swim school is new. Like, what kind of person are you targeting to be a swim instructor?
Yeah, so first and foremost, for swim instructors, the biggest things, a lot of people assume like we're looking for ex-swimmers or collegiate swimmers and all that kind of stuff. To be honest, the thing that we look for more than anything else in these, we call them swim associates, are a deep love for kids and a positive personality, right? Like those two things are paramount above anything else. If you walk into your interview and within the first 20 seconds, you can show me that you actually have emotion, right? Like it's, hey, nice to meet you, Patrick, tell me about yourself, and and you can respond and be happy and smiley and be a person. That's one of the biggest things. And then that second piece is the love for kids, right? If you hire someone that loves being around kids, which is not everybody, right? A lot of people don't like working with kids. It can be stressful, it can be difficult, it can be loud, and
Yeah.
a lot from a sensory standpoint. You've got to love being with kids, but if you can find someone with those two skills, they're going to be your best swim instructor ever, right? Typically, our org chart has our swim associates as kind of the team members, teaching the lessons, lifeguarding, running the front desk. And then we usually have a couple shift leads that help us as we're running the shift, taking care of the customers, checking off skills for kids, and making sure we're providing that parent feedback. And then typically a store has 2 assistant managers. I run my locations with a junior assistant manager and a senior, so that there is some level of growth built into just the natural hierarchy. And then a general manager. What we've gone to this last year is a dual GM position, because there's a lot of economies of scale that can be derived from that general manager that's focused on running more than one location. And you can do that as long as you have really strong assistant managers to support them. But that's the typical org structure within our 4 walls.
And on the build out, I know, in the FDD it lists around it, like you said, it's a pricey build out, 2 to 3.5 million. But I believe you said it's coming down. So, maybe like your most recent build, have you guys done any kind of value engineering to lower the total build out cost on a unit these days?
That's where our focus has been, I think, for the entire brand over the past 18 to 24 months. A couple of these stores, especially the first couple that I opened, way too expensive, very inefficient use of the space, just not maximizing the potential and decreasing costs as much as possible. But that's also what comes with buying into an early franchise brand, right? Like the brand was, again, proven, going back to what we talked about at the beginning of this call, but it hadn't built in certain markets that acted and resembled Utah, right? It hadn't built in markets that were Denver and Arizona and Idaho. It wasn't in these markets. It didn't know how to behave and how to adjust the business model to be successful. So through our first couple units, what we realized was, these build outs are way too expensive and they don't need to be. First off, we don't need as much space as we thought. Second off, they don't need to be as expensive as they need to be. And part of that cost was driven through just the, inflation of COVID construction costs
Yeah.
that, every brick and mortar concept in the world dealt with. But that's come down. But even with that coming back down, I still feel like if we were to rebuild one of these locations that we built during that time, it's still too expensive. So one of the things that we've really been focused on, and one of the lessons that I've learned is just you've got to be super uber focused on controlling your cost from a build out standpoint and that relationship from build out cost to payback period, right? If you're going to raise capital, especially equity, you've got to make sure that you have those two things balanced because again, you can't go build out a $2.5 million store if it's only going to kick off 150 or $200,000 in EBITDA. It just the math doesn't work.
Yeah, it's too.
You layer on debt on top of that as well, and that'll crush your brand, right? And that's what I think a lot of the early franchisees learned and experienced within Big Blue was, they were over levered, and then all of a sudden interest rates went to the moon, and the store was performing decently well, but because the build out cost was so expensive, their EBITDA positive, but their cash flow negative because all that cash is going to service that debt, right? So I think that that's one of the balances that we've really figured out now. We've paid off the majority of our debt within our business portfolio. We're raising some capital right now to build out two additional locations this next year. And those two additional locations, rather than being in that $2 to $3.5 million stage from a capital investment standpoint, I'm projecting that those will be somewhere between 1.4 to 1.6 all in. So now I look at that and go, okay, 10,000 square feet, we shrink that down to 7,000 square feet or 6,000 even. We're more efficient with the space. There's more economies of scale with labor costs, with operating costs from a utility standpoint, all those fixed costs that go into the business. And then if we can decrease that construction build out by $500,000 to $1 million per, well, now I'm getting 3 stores out of 2 stores worth of previous cost.
Yeah.
And the return profile stays exactly the same as long as we're efficient with our water and the business flow operates the way that we believe it can. So that's been kind of our focus now as we move into 2026 and really scaling our growth here over the coming years.
Can you give a tangible example? You said you shrunk from 10,000 square feet for the previous model to now you're closer 6 to 7,000, let's call it. Is the pool smaller? Was there too extravagant and too large of a lobby that was just dead space that you didn't need? Like, where did you find the gaps where you're like, hey, we don't actually need this, and we can cut this out without degrading the experience of the customer?
Yeah, because you bring up a good point. I mean, you don't want to go too small because that experience for the customer is important. But there's a level where it's just diminishing returns, where an extra 1,000 square feet doesn't make any difference, right? I saw this time and time again within food and beverage. One of our top performing Nader's Bakery and Cafe locations that we had, it was constantly packed. The lobby was full. And our logic was, well, if we build, and expand the lobby and it costs us another 300 grand, we'll be able to seat X amount of more customers. We'll get more people in the building. We'll do more business and more revenue, right? And what happened was we built out that big lobby. It spread everyone out in the lobby, same amount of volume, didn't see an increase in sales because everyone knew what to expect. And now rather than it feeling packed, it felt a little less busy, right? And I think you can get into trouble with that, especially within the psychology of the customer, because you think about it when you walk into a restaurant that's 4,000 square feet and it's packed, whether you've tried the food or not, you're like, whoa, what's going on here, right? Like the food must be amazing, the culture must be good. Like I'm part of the cool scene now. You could have that same number of people with the same good food in a store that's 8,000 square feet, but now they're all spread out. And you walk in as a customer, and the psychology says, oh, this place is really slow. Like, I wonder what's wrong. Like, the food must not be that good, right? So I think that there's a factor of that. And that's really what I'm trying to play into now as we're looking at our locations. We could have a busy location and there's 3 or 4 lanes of the pool that we're not using that half hour because there's not enough, kids in lanes or kids in classes for that half hour. And if the customer walks in and they see that, they might think, oh, well, the swimming lessons must not be that good here or everyone would be here, right? Whether that's true or not, there's the psychology there of that being there on top of the costs, on top of all those other factors that I mentioned. So that's really what I'm trying to focus on now is the portrayal of really who we are, which is industry leading experience, industry leading technology, industry leading curriculum, and merging that with the psychology of the customer and taking out the inefficiencies of the 4 walls. So really where we've reduced those spaces are a couple lanes on the pool, some of the changing room, and some of the lobby. But you walk into one of these smaller locations and the experience is just the same. It's going to feel busier because the lobby's a little bit smaller. And I think the reaction that we're going to get from the customer is this is the hop in place. This is where everyone is. And as long as we take care of them in the right way, they're going to feel a part of that cool crowd.
I've obviously thought about the fact that I think everyone kind of knows, like you see a line at a restaurant or whatever it is, and you're going to be drawn to it because your natural reaction is like, what are they selling there that everyone's waiting for? But yeah, I've never really heard someone refer to this kind of the psychological game as you laid it out. And I think it's totally spot on. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really good just factor for any brick and mortar operator to consider is don't add any extra square footage if you don't need it. Cause yeah, you might end up shooting yourself in the foot to a degree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think every new concept wants to do that. Like we even fell into that trap with Savory Fund in the early days where every brand new concept we would take and we'd be like, oh, we could do this. And we've got this cool idea. And let's add this cool bar space here. And we could do a live DJ in the corner here and add this space. And all of a sudden you've added $1 million to your build out and the store's another 2,000 square feet. And guess what? The customer doesn't notice the difference. And they would have come anyways if it was 4,000 square feet, but now you've got the overhead. And then there's that psychology factor that can play into that as well. So I just think that a lot of people fall into that trap because it's always the new shiny penny and bigger is not always better, right? It can
Yeah.
be super efficient, use your 4 walls, and if anything, reduce your box to save on costs and drop additional profitability to the bottom line. That will help you raise more capital over time because it's going to increase your payback period to your investors.
What are you seeing from the economics at Big Blue right now? And also, if you could kind of just give us a overview of, as a customer, what does that pricing model look like? I assume it's you buy like a package that's maybe it's an 8 week or I don't know how long, but some type of program where you're on a recurring revenue membership until the swim lessons are up.
Yeah, so that's another part of the business that, as I consider Big Blue still emerging, we're still figuring out and we're still learning and evolving within. I think that there's a huge component to lean into more from a membership model standpoint. Right now, our business model really is built around perpetual lessons. So that lesson, like I mentioned, which is 30 minutes long, one time per week, same time every week. So it's convenient for the schedule with the same teacher. And you create that repetition. The kids stay in the program as long as they want, right? Longer is always better because you've got to continually practice that.
Yeah.
The challenge with that model that I see and the opportunity is that for some customers, they get busy, right? And there's things going on in their lives and they might just want to pause lessons for like a month or two, right? Currently, under our current platform, we don't have the ability to call it pause your membership or pause your lesson for a couple months. You have to cancel and then re-enroll, which is a silly way of doing it. So we're actually in the process right now of changing that model, that revenue model, to being more membership focused, where we can really highlight a lot of the benefits, a lot of the pros that we can provide to them, and a lot of the features that a membership brings to the customer that right now we're not taking credit for. It's just part of what we do, but we're not taking credit for it. And I think that that's a missed opportunity. So right now, our swimming lessons here in Utah are $31 a lesson. If you've got 4 lessons in a month, you're roughly $124 for the month. One of the things that we run into is that can be a lot if you've got 3 or 4 kids in lessons for 1 month, right? So there's some price sensitivity there. I think that the price is the right price because we run an exceptional facility, beautiful, it's expensive. If you want cheap lessons, go to the rec center and you're going to be in a class with 12 other kids for 15 minutes. And to be honest, the kids are not going to learn much.
Yeah.
You come to our program, you pay the money, you're going to get what you want out of that, but you have to stay with us for a while. I think the membership model and switching to more of a membership type program that allows the customer to buy a membership and then have that monthly cost be a slightly reduced per monthly cost for that swim lesson, and then layer in all those other features and benefits like open swim time where families can come in and use the pool during off hours, or potentially birthday parties, or water aerobics, right? And teaching water aerobics during off hours and dark hours when the kids are in school, renting out lanes for lap swimming. Like there's all these different aspects of the business that we just haven't tapped into yet that I see as being accretive to that overall profitability of the business. Because a business model like Big Blue, it's 90% of it's fixed cost, right? The labor piece is the variable piece that you're always trying to tweak and dial in as much as possible to create as much profitability while still taking care of the customer and not seeing a decrease in customer service. So if we can utilize the fixed cost space that we're already paying for in this big, beautiful building during the hours when we're not teaching swimming lessons, and if part of that comes into the benefits of our membership program, I think that we're going to see a big uptick in the perceived value from both the customer and the retention of our consumers when they might just want to put a pause on their membership and then come back to us after a month or two versus canceling classes and then re-enrolling.
I definitely think there's got to be an angle there that can work long term, and especially for that, those families that do have multiple kids. I think even just back to the psychology that there is when you're paying one membership versus it's just $31 a class times 3 or 4 kids. Yeah, it feels like you're buying more. So wrapping up here, I'd love to hear about your plans. I know you obviously are in the midst of building to 21 units. Do you plan to actually go the distance, so to speak? There's some franchisees who they'll buy big territories, but they do have an intention to, say, flip it in 4 to 6 years. Are you kind of thinking of being in this for the long haul? And also, I think you have a few kind of side investments, which I'd just be curious to hear. And I think the audience would be curious to hear what else you kind of have going on.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think you always build a business as if you're never going to sell, right? And I think that if you keep that mindset, then you're going to make the right decisions. Because I think, especially within private equity, what that taught me in seeing all sorts of concepts is you can tell the businesses that are, those 3 to 4 year flips. People make decisions on materials and labor and marketing and all that stuff to be flashy at the time, but it's not built with the end in mind, right? Of saying, what if I couldn't sell this and I had this for 20 years, right? So that's really the way that I'm thinking about this. Yeah, I think the way that you always raise money on the counter end of that argument is you've got to demonstrate a return to investors. And a lot of the time that return comes from selling that business, model off to another investor that wants to take and build out the rest of your territory or portfolio. So we're kind of approaching it from both of those aspects of the plan right now is probably another 5 to 7 years growing out our territory, getting this to be that, call it $7 to $10 million in store level EBITDA. And then, selling that off to someone that's looking for either additional growth with the remaining territory that we have or more of an annuity and running that for the next 10, 20 years. There's a lot of family offices that are in that space that are wanting, that guaranteed return year over year with something that's really decoupled with, all the technology, the craziness that's going on with that. So I see this being a very attractive asset here 5 to 7 years from now. But worst case or best case scenario, whichever way you want to look at it, if we held this for the next 10, 20 years and it was, the foundation of our portfolio that we're building, and we use the cash flow from this to help fund additional investments, whether that be franchise or concepts that we're starting ourselves, I think both of those scenarios is a win for everybody involved in a good scenario. So that's kind of from a high level perspective, our strategy and what we're thinking about. But it's always fun to play and get involved in different businesses. Like I said, got a lot of entrepreneur bones in my body. And I think a lot of people, especially being younger like us in our careers, they get too focused on playing and the shiny now and the new car and the new house and all that stuff. And really what my wife and I decided was, let's stay put. We've been in our home now for 13 years. Could we have moved into something bigger and nicer? Yeah, we could have, right? But we decided to stay put and we decided to keep our mortgage payment small and really focus on the grind. So right now we're focused on Big Blue 100% with a few other little side passion projects that we're working on. Nothing probably ready to really focus on and talk about yet.
Sure.
We've got high level collectibles business that we're invested in and building slowly. We've got a subscription box that we're rolling out and launching. We've got a development company for commercial and residential real estate that we're partnered in, and a few other things kind of on the side. So a few little side projects, but right now our full focus is on obviously our investors within Big Blue, continuing to build out our portfolio and making this into the best swim school in the country.
Super cool. Well, I think you're off to a great start, and I think the audience will have found this pretty valuable, especially from, we do have a pretty sizable chunk of people come from a private equity, more financial background, and just hearing your path into this, I think will resonate. So if there are people who want to get in touch and or just follow along and see, you mentioned some side projects that might come to market at some point later on, where's the best place where people could follow along with your journey?
Yeah, hopefully it's been helpful. Hopefully it's not just a bunch of hot air, because you get on these sometimes and it's like, hopefully this has been helpful to somebody, Just don't make the same mistakes. I mean, that's what I always take away from these types of conversations is learn what mistakes other people have made and then try not to replicate those, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, if people want to follow along, I'm the most active on LinkedIn. That's the best place to find me. There's a lot of Austin Smiths out there, but if you search Austin Smith Big Blue, you'll find me. So Austin C. Smith, I usually put my middle initial in there just because of the Smith name. I feel like I have to give my social security number when I get my haircut these days. But yeah, follow along on LinkedIn, reach out. I always love making acquaintances within the business world. You never know what the future holds and what those relationships might turn into over time.
Totally. Well, yeah, folks, we'll put his LinkedIn bio, the link to it in the show notes, because there probably will be a lot of Austin Smiths. So luckily we're already connected. So we'll put that in the show notes, folks. And yeah, we'll see everyone on the next Fran Dogs episode. That's a pod.